You think you know what silence sounds like. That heavy, comfortable quiet that wraps around you when everyone's gone and the house is finally yours. No footsteps overhead. No voices bleeding through the walls. Just you. The hum of the refrigerator. Maybe the distant bark of a neighbor's dog fading into the night. That silence used to feel like freedom. It doesn't anymore. The stories you're about to read are real. They were told by real people. Ordinary Americans who were home alone, just like you've been hundreds of times before. People who thought they were safe. People who had no idea that something, or someone, was already inside, already watching, already waiting. Some of them got lucky. Some of them barely made it. And one of them opened a window she should have kept shut. A decision she replays in her mind every single night. Before you turn off the lights tonight, you need to hear what happened to them. Because the most terrifying thing about every single one of these stories isn't the intruder, or the shadow, or the sound from inside the wall. It's how normal everything seemed, right up until the moment it wasn't. The phone that knew too much. Tyler was a junior at a state university in Ohio, back home for the weekend while his family visited relatives in Pittsburgh. He'd turned down the trip. Midterms were coming up. He had a paper to finish, and honestly, the idea of a quiet house to himself sounded like exactly what he needed. He was asleep by 11, face down on his mattress, laptop still glowing on the desk. The first time his phone's voice assistant woke him up, he didn't even open his eyes all the way. The assistant was responding to something. He caught a fragment of the reply before his hand found the phone and silenced it. He figured he'd rolled over and triggered it accidentally. It happened to everyone. He set the phone face down on the nightstand and went back to sleep. 50 minutes later, it happened again. This time, Tyler sat up. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside his window. His phone was lit up on the nightstand, and the voice assistant was reading something aloud. A date. A specific date. July 4th, 1776. Tyler picked up the phone. The assistant was responding to a query, but Tyler hadn't typed anything. He hadn't spoken. The prompt on the screen read, "What significant event took place on this date?" He sat there for a long moment, staring at it. He told himself it was a glitch. Voice assistants could misfire, pick up on ambient sounds, background noise from the TV next door, the audio from a podcast playing in the apartment above. He went to the settings, disabled the voice activation feature entirely, and set the phone back down. He was almost asleep when it happened a third time. This time, he didn't silence it quickly enough to miss the whole response. The assistant finished reading before he could grab the phone, its flat digital voice filling the dark room. "Here's the contact information I found for Tyler MC. His full name. His actual, complete full name." He didn't go back to his room that night. He grabbed his keys, drove to a 24-hour diner 4 miles away, and sat in a booth under fluorescent lights until 7 in the morning, drinking coffee he didn't taste, watching the parking lot through the window. He still doesn't know what queried his assistant that night. He's not sure he wants to. The window on the ground floor. Marcus had always been the type to keep his head down and stay out of trouble. He was 18, a high school senior living in a suburb outside of Atlanta, and on the nights his parents worked late, he filled his time the same way he always had: gaming, snacking, ignoring the world. It was February, cold enough that his window had been shut for months. His bedroom was on the first floor, which had never bothered him before. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets were well lit, and the worst thing that ever happened on his block was someone's lawn ornament getting knocked over on Halloween. The knock came at 2:14 in the morning. Sharp, deliberate. 3 knocks against the glass like someone using their knuckles. Marcus spun around in his chair so fast he almost tipped it. There was nothing visible through the window, just his own reflection in the dark glass and the faint amber glow of the streetlight beyond. He sat there for almost a full minute, heart hammering before deciding it. It'd been a branch, or a raccoon, or anything that wasn't what his brain was trying to tell him it was. He closed his blinds. He turned back to his game. He turned the volume up slightly. 20 minutes later, the knocking came again. Same rhythm, same pressure. 3 deliberate knocks from a hand that knew exactly where the glass was. Marcus stood up. He thought about calling his mom. He thought about calling 911. Then he thought about how embarrassed he'd be if it turned out to be his idiot friend Jake from down the street trying to get him to sneak out. One look, he told himself. I'll crack the window an inch, confirm it's nothing, and go back to bed. He reached up and pulled the window open, just a sliver, maybe 2 inches. 2 hands shot out of the darkness. They grabbed the bottom rail of the window from outside and shoved it up in one violent motion, all the way to the top of the frame. The cold air hit Marcus like a wall, and he was already screaming before he fully registered what he was seeing. A figure in a dark hoodie, face obscured, one leg already coming over the sill. He threw punches. He didn't know how many. Later, he couldn't remember. What he remembered was grabbing the desk lamp with both hands and swinging it hard, connecting with the side of the man's head. The figure fell back outside with a grunt. Marcus slammed the window shut, twisted the lock, and backed against the far wall. Through the glass, he saw the man stagger upright, look back at the window once, and then disappear into the dark. Marcus called 911 immediately. He sat on top of his dresser, off the floor, away from the window, until the police arrived. No one was caught. The investigation turned up nothing useful. But the screen on the outside of Marcus's window, the one that should have been covering the gap, had been removed cleanly, set aside in the bushes. Someone had been planning this for a while. Something in the chimney Diane grew up in the kind of rural Virginia that MapQuest used to give up on. The nearest town was 12 minutes down a 2-lane road. The nearest neighbor was a quarter mile through the woods, and the house sat on a long gravel driveway that was invisible from the main road. She loved it. Until the summer she was 16 and spent a Saturday alone in the house while her parents drove up to see her aunt in Northern Virginia. She was on the couch watching TV when she heard the impact on the roof. Not a branch, too heavy for that. And besides, the sky was clear. More like something landing. Then a metallic clang like a collision with the top of the chimney. Diane lowered the TV volume. The fireplace had been covered for the season. Her dad had put a tight cap on it back in May to keep critters from nesting inside. But through the mesh screen in front of the fireplace, she could now hear something moving inside the chimney. A dull, rhythmic banging that traveled down the shaft and into the room. She called her dad. He said it was probably a bird or a squirrel that had gotten in somehow. Told her not to open the damper and promised they'd deal with it when they got home. She went back to the couch. Then the front door rattled. Not the wind. There was no wind. 3 hard pulls from outside, like someone gripping the handle and yanking with purpose. Diane was on her feet and in the hallway before she'd made the conscious decision to move. She stood in front of the door, 6 feet back, and peered through the peephole. She saw nothing. The porch was empty. She stood there for 90 seconds, not breathing, watching the distorted fisheye view of the porch through the peephole. Then she unlocked the door and threw it open. The porch was empty. The yard beyond it was empty. The long gravel driveway was empty. The banging in the chimney had stopped. The silence that followed was the worst part. Because it wasn't the silence she'd grown up with, the comfortable quiet of the countryside at night. This was something else. This was a held breath. Diane locked the door, deadbolted it, and called her parents back. They came home early. No one ever found out what made those sounds. Her dad checked the chimney cap the next morning. It was still firmly in place. There was no damage to the roof, no evidence of anything on the porch. Whatever it was gone. But Diane hasn't stayed alone at that house since, and she never opened a door in the dark again. There's a reason why parents tell their children to keep the doors locked and the lights on. It's not just about fear. It's about acknowledgement. The quiet admission that the world contains people who look at a house with the lights off and see an opportunity. Who drive slowly down residential streets at 2 a.m, watching for the single window that's still glowing. Most of the time, nothing happens, but sometimes someone stops the car. What Layla knew. Rachel was 22, working part-time at a coffee shop in suburban Denver and living at home between semesters. Her parents traveled frequently for work, which left her and her dog, a 3-year-old shepherd mix named Layla, as the primary inhabitants of the house most weekday evenings. Rachel didn't mind. She had her music, her shows, her routines. Layla was good company, calm, well-trained, the kind of dog who'd curl up at the foot of the bed and sleep through anything, except for that Thursday in October. Rachel had her speaker going at a reasonable volume in her upstairs room. Not loud enough to rattle the walls, but enough to fill the space and keep the house from feeling too quiet. She was painting her nails and watching something on her tablet when she became aware that Layla was barking. Not her playful bark, not her alert to the mailman bark. This was something different. Low, constant, escalating. The bark of a dog who has identified something real. Rachel pulled her earbuds out and went to the hallway. Layla was already at the top of the basement stairs, stiff-legged, tail rigid, staring down into the dark below. As Rachel watched, the dog started down the stairs, still barking. Rachel followed, hit the basement light switch at the top of the stairs. Layla went straight to the boiler room, a small separate space in the back of the basement with its own door, used mainly for storage. She planted herself in front of the door and lost her composure entirely, scratching at the wood, hurling herself against it, barking in short, frantic bursts. Rachel stood 5 feet back. "Hello," she said. "Is someone in there?" She doesn't know what she would have done if someone had answered. She grabbed Layla by the collar, no easy task, and dragged her back up the basement stairs, then locked the door at the top. She texted her dad, "Come home as soon as you can. Layla's going crazy at the boiler room door. I'm scared." Her father arrived 40 minutes later. He didn't go straight to the boiler room. First, he noticed something on his way through the basement, a ladder propped against the wall beneath the small rectangular window near the ceiling. A window that was now a hole. The glass broken inward, shards scattered across the concrete floor. He called 911. The police found evidence of an intrusion, footprints in the basement, disturbed storage boxes near the boiler room door. No one was found inside. Whoever Layla had cornered had slipped back out through the broken window sometime after Rachel locked the basement door. The detective who took the report told Rachel something she's never forgotten. "Your dog saved your life. If you had opened that door, we don't know who was in there or what they wanted. But it wasn't good." Layla got an extra bowl of food that night and every night for the rest of her life. The figure by the bed, Cassandra, was 15 the first time she encountered what she still describes as the most terrifying thing she's ever seen. She lived with her father, a nurse whose shift schedule rotated between days and nights, meaning that several weeks out of every month, Cassandra was alone in the house after dark. She'd gotten used to it. She knew which floorboards creaked, which pipes knocked when the heat kicked on, and exactly how long it took for the house to cycle through its nighttime sounds. She wasn't easily scared. She was lying in bed one Wednesday night in November, an hour after turning off the TV. She wasn't fully asleep yet, just drifting, that half-conscious state where sounds feel both near and far. Then she heard the door of her closet shift. Not open, just shift, like pressure change, like something on the other side adjusting its weight. She went still. The door handle moved, slowly with purpose, and then with a soft click, the door swung open. Cassandra pulled her comforter over her face. She lay completely motionless, not breathing, listening to the silence of her room and the sound of her own pulse. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3. She lowered the blanket to eye level. There was a man standing beside her bed. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, standing close enough that if she'd reached out, she could have touched him. He wasn't doing anything. He was just looking at her, or in the direction she was lying. She couldn't be certain in the dark. Then he turned his head slowly toward the window. Then he walked out of the room. His footsteps were quiet, but she could track them. Down the hall, to the stairs, and then the unmistakable sound of the front door opening and the night air rushing in. Cassandra didn't move from that position. Pressed against the wall at the head of her bed, blanket clutched to her chin, for more than an hour. When she finally crept downstairs, the front door was standing wide open. She called her father. She called him again when he didn't pick up. She called a third time, and he answered on the second ring. She was at her aunt's house 15 minutes later, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink, trying to explain what she had seen to 2 adults who kept using words like dream and sleep paralysis, and who went silent when they drove by her house the next morning and saw the front door still open, exactly as she had left it. No one ever explained how the man got in through the closet. No one ever found him. The obsession next door. This story comes from a young woman named Ashley, who was 16 at the time. She asked that her last name not be used. The boy who lived next door was named Connor. He was 17. He had no visible friends. He was almost always home. And Ashley noticed early on that whenever she went outside, to get the mail, to sit on the porch, to leave for school, Connor would appear at his window or his front door within minutes, as though he'd been stationed there, waiting. She tried to be civil. She tried to be busy. She tried the body language of polite disinterest. Earbuds in, eyes down, short answers. None of it worked. One afternoon, she told him plainly, standing in her driveway, keeping her voice level and direct, that she didn't want to be friends, that she needed him to stop finding reasons to approach her, and that she wanted him to respect her space. The way his face changed when she said it was something she described to police later as frightening, not explosive. Worse than that, the expression of someone who had decided something without saying a word. 2 weeks later, her parents went to a fundraiser dinner downtown. Ashley stayed home to work on a history project, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her laptop, surrounded by notes. It was a normal evening. She was almost done with the first section of the project when she felt it. A slight shift in the mattress beneath her. subtle enough that she might have dismissed it as the house settling. She looked under the bed. Connor was lying there, completely still, staring up at her through the gap in the bed frame. She didn't scream. Later, she wasn't sure why. She thought maybe her voice had simply stopped working. She ran. Down the stairs, out the front door, across both lawns to Connor's house, where she rang the bell repeatedly until his mother opened the door. Connor never came out. Ashley called the police herself over his mother's objections. They found him in her room, still there, as though he'd been waiting for her to come back. They arrested him on the spot. In the subsequent investigation, police searched his bedroom. Among other things, they found a photograph of Ashley taken through her bedroom window at night from the outside. In the photograph, she was asleep. It had been taken weeks before the night she found him under her bed. The investigation determined it wasn't the first time he had been in her house. Not every threat arrives through a broken window. Some walk calmly out of the woods. Some are invited in by a 7-year-old who doesn't know any better. And some have been living inside your walls since before you ever moved in. These are the stories that are hardest to shake, not because of what happened, but because of how ordinary the moments before were. A sunny afternoon, a phone call, the sound of an air vent, and then everything changes. The Man from the Trees. Megan was 24 and living alone in a rented house in a rural stretch of central Tennessee. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The road that passed her house was the kind that locals know and tourists don't, and the only regular traffic was the mail truck and the occasional tractor. She'd moved there for the quiet. She liked the space. On warm afternoons, she'd drag a folding chair out to the grass, stretch out, and let the sun do the rest. That's what she was doing when the man stepped out of the tree line. He came from the woods at the back edge of the property, just appeared at the border of the tree shadow, maybe 50 yards away. He was watching her. Megan sat up slowly, putting her feet flat on the ground, already calculating distance to the door. "Do you need something?" she called. He walked toward her, unhurried, deliberate. He told her he lived up the hill. She could see the roof line of a structure through the trees, so this was possibly true, and that he had some kind of issue with a water pump on his property. He wondered if she could come up and take a look. Megan told him she was on her way out. He nodded. He thanked her. He turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing behind the curve of a large boulder at the tree line. Megan folded her chair up and went inside. She locked the back door, then the front door, then checked both windows on the ground floor. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself this for about 55 minutes. Then she remembered her sunglasses. She left them in the grass when she came inside. She stood at the back window and looked out. The glasses were there, a glint of silver in the green. The yard was empty. The tree line was still. She went out quickly, moving fast, eyes sweeping the property. She found the glasses. She picked them up. She turned to go back inside. He was behind the shed, not hiding exactly, more like positioned. His body half concealed by the corner of the building, one shoulder and part of his face visible. Watching her, Megan said loudly and clearly, "I'm calling the police right now." She walked back inside without running. She made herself not run, and locked the door. She called 911. The responding officers found nothing on her property. They knocked on the door of the house up the hill. No one answered and no vehicle was parked outside. They took her statement, gave her a case number, and told her to call again if she saw him. She saw a therapist twice a week for 6 months after that. She moved out of the house before her lease was up. She's never left her sunglasses outside since. The call Danny answered. This story belongs to Daniel, who was 7 years old when it happened and is now in his 30s. He remembers every detail. He was staying at his grandmother's apartment in Queens, a routine he'd had since he was a toddler. His grandmother was sharp, practical, and deeply old-fashioned in ways that included never learning to drive. She walked everywhere, to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, to the library 10 blocks away. That Saturday, she wanted to go to the library. Daniel didn't. He was tired. He was happy with the cartoons that were on, and walking 10 blocks for books sounded like the worst possible use of a morning. His grandmother gave him the rules. Don't leave the apartment. Don't open the door for anyone. And don't answer the phone. She left. He answered the phone. He was 7 and curious, and the phone rang 4 times, and no 7-year-old in history has ever successfully left a ringing phone alone. The man on the other end was friendly, easy. He asked Daniel his name, and Daniel told him. He asked if his parents were home, and Daniel said no. He asked if Daniel was by himself, and Daniel said yes. He asked if Daniel knew his address, and Daniel gave him the borough. "All right, buddy. Talk to you later," the man said, and hung up. Daniel went back to the cartoons. He didn't think about it again. 45 minutes later, someone knocked on the apartment door. Daniel remembered what his grandmother had said. He stayed on the couch. "Danny?" said the voice from the other side of the door. "Danny, I know you're in there, buddy. I can see you on the couch." Daniel looked to his left. The curtain over the narrow side window beside the door was slightly open. Through the gap, he could see a man standing on the landing, heavy-set, gray-bearded, wearing a jacket that was too warm for the season. "Come on out, Danny. I've got something for you in my truck." Daniel ran to the back bedroom. He locked the door and sat against it. The knocking continued. Then it moved to the back door, which led to the fire escape. The handle rattled. Someone applied pressure, then more pressure. Then his grandmother's voice, loud and furious, cut through everything from the hallway. She had come back early. Through the bedroom window, Daniel watched the man move quickly through the narrow alley below, not running, but moving fast, the walk of someone who doesn't want to be remembered. He got into a truck parked at the curb and pulled away. Daniel's grandmother reported the incident to the police that same afternoon. She'd caught a partial plate number and a description of the truck. She never confirmed whether anything came of the report. Daniel's mother never allowed him to stay there alone again after that. She came back early, Daniel says, when he tells this story now. 10 minutes later. That's all it was. If she'd stayed at the library another 10 minutes, I don't know what I would have done. I was 7. There was nothing I could have done. The breathing in the wall. Jenna was 27 when she signed the lease on her first house, a small 2-bedroom in a mid-sized city in North Carolina, her first time living completely alone. She was proud of herself. She'd done the walkthrough, checked the plumbing, tested the outlets, confirmed the furnace worked. She missed a few things. The sounds in the walls started on her second night. She was in the kitchen washing the single pot she'd used for dinner when she heard it. A dry, scratching movement from somewhere inside the wall behind the stove. She told herself rodents. Old houses have rodents. She'd call an exterminator in the morning. The sound migrated over the next 2 nights, from the kitchen to the bathroom, and then, on the 3rd night, into the wall beside her bed. She lay there in the dark and listened to something move inside the structure of her own house. She told herself, rodents, probably rats, possible raccoon in the eaves. She'd seen it happen in documentaries. She'd call in the morning, but she didn't sleep well. and she started noticing other things. Her groceries were going faster than they should. She was single, eating alone, shopping for one. But somehow the bread was gone before she expected. The peanut butter was running low. The carton of orange juice that should have lasted the week was empty by Tuesday. She wondered if she was stress eating without realizing it. She added it to her list of things to figure out later. Then she woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of breathing. It wasn't hers. It was slower, deeper, coming from her left side. She turned the lamp on. The room was empty. The sound stopped. She sat up for an hour, lamp on, looking at every corner of the room, before telling herself it was the house settling, or her half-asleep brain manufacturing sounds. In the morning, she turned on the air conditioning for the first time. It was hot enough that she needed it. She went through the house, checking the vents, and found that one of them, the large rectangular vent directly beside her bed, wasn't outputting any air. She knelt down and shined her phone's flashlight through the slats. There was no duct behind the vent. There was no ductwork at all, just the open interior of the wall, dark and deep and larger than it had any reason to be. She replaced the vent cover and didn't think about it the rest of the day. That night, the breathing started again. She was awake this time, fully awake, staring at the ceiling, aware of exactly what she was hearing. It was coming from the vent, slow and rhythmic. A person's breathing. She picked up the flashlight from her nightstand and held it in front of the vent slats. A pair of eyes blinked back at her from the darkness inside the wall. She didn't grab her keys. She didn't get her shoes. She ran, out of the bedroom, down the hallway, through the front door, into the yard, into the street, in bare feet, in the middle of the night, screaming. Her neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Carol, who had always found Jenna polite, but a little quiet, opened her door to find her standing in the street in pajamas, unable to stop shaking. The police were called. What they found in the walls of Jenna's house took time to piece together, but the summary was this: a man, homeless, mentally ill, with a history of breaking and entering, had discovered a gap in the foundation and had been living inside the wall cavity and unused ductwork of the house. He had entered and exited through a concealed access point in the crawlspace. He had been eating her food. He had been living there, police estimated, since before she moved in. Jenna never went back into that house. She broke her lease, forfeited her deposit, and moved into an apartment with 2 other people and a very large, very protective dog. She still sleeps with the lights on. What makes a home feel safe? The locks, the lights, the familiar sounds of the structure around you, the knowledge that you know this place, its noises, its shadows, its rhythms, better than any stranger ever could. But what if you were wrong about that? What if the house already had a story before you moved in? What if the shadow in the hall wasn't a shadow? What if every single thing you dismissed as a glitch or a creak or your imagination wasn't? These final stories are the ones people share late at night. The ones where the ending isn't clean. The ones where no one got a full explanation. The ones that stayed. Knocking at the back of the house. Owen was 19 and studying engineering at a school in rural upstate New York. He'd taken a gap semester to save money and was living back home, a farmhouse about 8 miles outside of the nearest town, at the end of a private road so long that you could stand on the porch and watch headlights approaching for a full 2 minutes before the car reached you. His parents had left early that Friday for a weekend with friends in Vermont. Owen had declined the invitation. He had things to do, he said. He had plans. The plans were a pizza, a movie, and 11 hours of uninterrupted sleep. He was asleep by 10:30. At some point in the night, he was awoken by a sound he immediately recognized as wrong. A dull thump from the back of the house, followed by the high metallic ring of something striking the chimney. He lay still and listened. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable, a repeated impact traveling down the inside of the chimney shaft, even and deliberate, like something or someone working their way down. Owen got out of bed. He stood in the hallway, listening, and for the next 40 minutes the sounds continued. Irregular thumping, the occasional scrape against the metal flashing, sounds that came from inside the walls rather than outside them. Then they stopped. The quiet lasted about 15 seconds before the front doorknob rattled. Owen didn't move. He stood in the hallway, in his socks, in the dark, and watched the front door. The rattling was sustained, not like wind, not like settling wood. Someone was holding the handle and applying force, and then releasing, and applying force again. He crept forward and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. The long private road beyond it was a dark line disappearing into the darker trees. He stood there until the rattling stopped. Then he waited 3 more minutes. Then, because he is the kind of person who needs to confirm things himself, he unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. The road was empty. The night was completely silent. He shut the door and locked it. He didn't sleep again. He sat in the kitchen with every light on, a large flashlight in his hand, until his parents called in the morning to check in. He told them he had a great night, that everything was fine. He never told them what actually happened, because he has no idea what actually happened. And in some ways, that's worse. The second home alone. This story belongs to Valerie, who was 17 and living with her mother and older brother in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. Her mother worked evenings several nights a week. Her brother, a college freshman, was almost always out, which meant that Valerie was the default homekeeper 2 or 3 nights per week, a responsibility she'd held for long enough that she'd stopped thinking of it as unusual. She knew the house. She trusted the house. She had lived there for 6 years. On a Tuesday evening in March, she was downstairs watching something on her laptop when she heard a sound from the ceiling above her. Not a creak, not settling, something shuffling. The living room had a cathedral ceiling. It soared 14 feet at the peak, which meant the attic sat directly above it. Valerie lowered her laptop volume. The shuffling continued, then paused, then continued. She went upstairs to the access door in her brother's closet. The pull string for the attic light had snapped months ago and never been repaired. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, came back, and pulled the access door open. She stepped up once. She stepped up a second time. She heard the floorboards groan near the far end of the attic, the dry, distinctive sound of old wood under weight, and then the soft brush of something moving against the plastic storage bags stacked along the wall. She stepped backward off the ladder, pulled the access door shut, and locked it from below. She called her mother, who told her she was probably hearing an animal that had gotten into the attic. Squirrels, raccoons. They got in through the eaves sometimes. Come spring, they'd have someone come out and seal it up. It was nothing to worry about. Valerie didn't go back up there. Her mother had a pest control company come in 2 weeks later. The technician found evidence of recent habitation in the far corner of the attic. Disturbed insulation. A flattened area that had been used repeatedly. A narrow gap in the soffit board that opened to the exterior. A space big enough for a person to squeeze through. Nothing living was found. Whatever had been up there had moved on. The neighbor boy, again. One of the cruelest things about feeling watched is that no one believes you until it's too late. This story comes from the same young woman, Ashley, who shared the account of finding Connor under her bed. But the story didn't end with his arrest. After the legal proceedings, Connor's family moved away. The house next door was quiet for months. Ashley breathed easier. She started going outside again without scanning the windows first. She told herself it was over. She was tanning in the backyard on a Saturday in late May when she looked up and saw a man standing at the tree line at the back of the property. She'd never seen him before. He was standing still, half shadowed by the tree cover, and he was watching her. Her first instinct was to stand up. Her second instinct, the one that won, was to go inside without showing that she'd seen him. She went inside and watched through the back window. He stood there for another 3 minutes, then turned and walked into the trees. Ashley called the police, who came and searched the tree line. They found nothing. She gave a description. They told her to call if she saw him again. She did. Twice. He was there the following Saturday. Same position, same stillness. And the Saturday after that. Then he stopped appearing. She never found out who he was or what he wanted. The reports were filed and never resolved. Ashley moved away for college that fall and has not returned to that house. She still checks her tree lines. Wherever she goes, whatever yard she's in, she can't stop. The phone call nobody made. The last story in this collection is short. It comes from a woman named Patricia, who was home alone in her house in suburban Michigan on a Wednesday afternoon while her husband was at work and her kids were at school. She was folding laundry in the bedroom. The TV was on for background noise. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Silence. Then, very quietly, the sound of breathing. She said hello twice more. Nothing. She hung up. The phone rang again immediately, same unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Later, listening to the voicemail, she heard several seconds of ambient sound before the call dropped. The distant sound of a television. A specific show she recognized because she was watching it in the other room. The call had been placed from inside her house. She called the police. They searched the house thoroughly. They found nothing. Her phone records were checked. The number the call originated from was an unregistered prepaid phone. It was never traced. Patricia moved through the rest of that day and every day after trying to explain it. A technical glitch, a misdial, a coincidence of sound. She's built a case for all of them, but she knows what she heard, and she's never quite trusted the silence in her own house since. The last ones. These are the stories told after midnight, when the group has thinned and the lights are low, and someone says, I've never told anyone this, but they are not the loudest or the most dramatic. They are the ones that settle. What Kevin heard through the ceiling. Kevin was 12, young enough that his parents still debated whether to leave him alone, old enough that he insisted he'd be fine. He was fine mostly. He'd been home alone a handful of times by then. 90 minutes here, 2 hours there, always with his mom's number saved at the top of his contacts and strict instructions about the door. This was a Sunday afternoon in September. His parents were at a birthday party for a family friend. They'd be back by 5. Kevin had the remote, the full contents of the snack drawer, and no one telling him he'd had enough. He was on the couch halfway through something he definitely wasn't supposed to watch when he heard the footstep. One footstep, from directly above him. The floor plan of the house was simple. Living room on the ground floor. His parents' bedroom directly above it. Kevin paused the TV and looked at the ceiling, as though he'd be able to see something through the drywall. Silence. He told himself the house was settling. He unpaused the TV. A second footstep, then a third, moving slowly across the floor above him in the direction of the bedroom door. Kevin turned the TV off. He sat on the couch and didn't move for a long time, listening to the house. He heard the third-floor bathroom door swing open and then click shut. He picked up his phone and called his mom. She didn't answer. He called his dad. No answer. He sat there for 11 minutes. He counted, watching the clock on his phone, before he heard the back door open and shut. Not slam. Open and shut, with the quiet deliberateness of someone trying not to be heard. He called 911. The police arrived within 6 minutes. They found the back door unlocked, though Kevin was certain it had been locked when his parents left. A window screen on the second floor had been pushed in. Upstairs, a dresser drawer in his parents' room was partially open, and his mother's jewelry box had been disturbed. A burglar, the officer told them, almost certainly searching the house, heard Kevin come home and left through the back. Kevin had not come home. He had been there the whole time. The burglar had been moving through the house for however long Kevin had been sitting on that couch. The sound of the lock. Sarah was 31 and living alone in a studio apartment in Chicago. Third floor, good neighborhood, deadbolt on the door, chain on the chain. She was a light sleeper. She'd always been one. At 4:17 on a Thursday morning, she woke up for no clear reason. The apartment was dark. The street outside was quiet. She lay still and waited for whatever had pulled her out of sleep to identify itself. She heard the deadbolt turn from the outside. The cylinder turned slowly. She could track it by sound, and then stopped, just short of disengaging, as though the key had gotten a quarter turn in before something went wrong. Sarah was out of bed in one motion. She crossed the apartment silently in her socks and pressed herself against the wall beside the door. Back to the plaster, shoulder next to the frame. The cylinder turned again, then stopped, then silence. She stood against the wall for 4 full minutes before she looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She called the building's emergency line immediately. The building manager came up within 20 minutes and checked the hallway, the stairwell, and the lobby camera footage. The footage showed a person, identity unclear, face obscured, on the third floor between 4:14 and 4:19 a.m., standing outside her door, then walking calmly back to the stairwell. The locks were changed the following morning. The person on the footage was never identified. Sarah started sleeping with her phone in her hand. The last night at Grandpa's, Nathan was 14 and had been staying at his grandfather's house in rural Georgia for a week while his parents were on their anniversary trip. His grandfather, a quiet man in his 70s who went to bed at 9 o'clock every night without fail, left him mostly to his own devices. On the last night, Nathan's grandfather went to bed at 8:55. Nathan stayed up in the den, gaming. At 11:30, he heard the side gate open. The gate was old and its hinges needed oil. It made a specific sound he'd memorized over a week of listening to it. He heard it open and then, after a pause, heard it close. He turned the porch light on from the inside switch. He went to the window. The side yard was empty. The gate was shut. He sat back down. 20 minutes later, the gate opened again and closed. He went back to the window. Empty. Gate shut. He woke his grandfather. His grandfather, to his credit, didn't dismiss it. He got up, put on his boots, and went outside with a flashlight. Nathan watched from the doorway. His grandfather walked the perimeter of the property, side yard, backyard, around the shed, and came back in saying he didn't see anything. The gate opened a fourth time at 12:45 a.m. Nathan watched his grandfather pick up the phone and call someone, his neighbor, a retired county sheriff who lived 2 properties over. The neighbor arrived in 9 minutes. They searched the property with 2 flashlights and a determination that Nathan found simultaneously reassuring and deeply worrying. In the backyard, behind the shed, they found boot prints in the soft soil. Recent, deliberately placed near the fence line. Someone had been walking the edge of the property, testing the gate, watching the house. No one was found. No one was ever identified. Nathan didn't sleep that night. His grandfather sat in the armchair in the den with the lights on until sunrise. "I've lived in this house for 41 years, his grandfather told him, not looking away from the window. "In all that time, I've never had to do what I did tonight." Nathan didn't ask what that meant. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. The door she didn't open. The last story is told by a woman named Monica, who was 23 and living with 2 roommates in a house in suburban Texas. Her roommates was gone for a long weekend. She had the house to herself. Saturday was fine. Sunday was fine. Monday was the day. She was working from home, laptop on the kitchen table, second coffee of the morning, completely ordinary morning. At 10:15, she heard a sound from the garage. The door that connected the garage to the kitchen was right beside the refrigerator, about 6 feet from where she was sitting. She assumed it was the house making its noises. Then she heard it again, and again. Someone in the garage was knocking on the interior door, gently, the way you knock when you want to be let in. Monica picked up her phone and called 911 without saying a word out loud. She walked silently to the back door of the kitchen, which led to the yard, and stepped outside, letting the door fall closed behind her. She crossed the yard, went through the back gate, and stood on the sidewalk behind the house, on the phone with the dispatcher, who told her to stay outside. She did. The police arrived. They found the garage door at the side of the house open. It had been lifted manually, bypassing the electronic lock. Inside the garage, they found evidence that someone had been there. A canvas bag that didn't belong to her or her roommates, containing, among other things, a length of rope. No one was caught. The knocking on the interior door had been designed to get her to open it from the inside. Monica still doesn't understand how she made the right call in that moment, grabbing her phone and walking out, rather than opening the door. She thinks about it constantly. She thinks about what the man on the other side of that door was planning. She decided not to go back to that house. She packed that afternoon and stayed with her parents until her lease ended. She doesn't regret it. She doesn't regret any decision she made that day. Except, maybe, for being there alone in the first place. What we carry home. Every person in this collection went back to ordinary life. They went back to work, to school, to routines and grocery runs and morning coffee. They kept living in houses, in apartments, in rooms on the first floor, and rooms next to attics, and rooms with vents beside the bed. But they changed. All of them changed. Not dramatically. Not in the ways you see in movies where the protagonist gets a dramatic transformation and a new haircut, and moves to a new city. In the real, quiet, unglamorous way that trauma actually works, they started checking under beds, locking doors they used to leave unlocked, sleeping with a light on for the first time since childhood, learning the sound of their own home so precisely that any deviation, any single floorboard out of place, would pull them out of the deepest sleep. Some of them got dogs. Some of them moved. Some of them still haven't told the people closest to them what happened. What unites these stories is not the presence of a monster or a malevolent force or anything supernatural. It's the presence of another human being who was where they shouldn't have been, doing what they shouldn't have been doing, and who counted on not being caught. Who counted on the assumption that a person alone in their own house is safe, is unobserved, is unimportant enough to bother. That assumption is the vulnerability. That assumption is what every person in this collection had to unlearn. You can't live in a state of constant vigilance. That's not living. That's a different kind of trapped. But what you can do is trust your instincts. Because in nearly every one of these stories, someone felt something was wrong before they could prove it. Layla the dog felt it before Rachel did. Tyler's gut told him something was off before his brain could construct a logical explanation. Monica's body was already moving toward the back door before her conscious mind had fully processed the knocking. The instinct to pay attention is older than any lock, any deadbolt, any security camera. It is the oldest safety system there is, and it works. Not always, not perfectly, not without cost, but it works. If you took anything from the stories in this collection, let it be this. Trust the silence when it changes shape. Trust the dog who won't stop barking. Trust the feeling in your chest when something feels wrong and you can't explain why. Trust yourself enough to check the lock twice. To call before you open the door. To leave before you find out what's on the other side. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to pay attention. That's what all of them wish they'd known. Before the window, before the footstep, before the breathing in the wall, pay attention. The ones that almost weren't told. There are stories that don't make it into collections like this. The ones told only once, in a low voice, usually to one other person, a best friend, a sibling, a therapist. The ones where the teller finishes and then says, "I've never told anyone that before." The ones that have been carried alone. These are some of those. The reflection that moved. First, Haley was 26, living alone in a second-floor apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. She'd been there for 18 months without incident. A perfectly average apartment in a perfectly average complex. The kind of place where everyone's on a first-name basis with their neighbor's Wi-Fi network, but couldn't pick them out of a lineup. She was getting ready for bed one evening, standing at the bathroom mirror, going through the routine she'd done 10,000 times. Face wash, moisturizer, contact lenses out. She was focused on her reflection, doing the careful close-up work that contact removal requires. Her reflection blinked. She blinked. Her reflection blinked first. She stood very still for 3 or 4 seconds, processing this. Then she stepped back from the mirror. Then she went through every room in the apartment with the lights in, checked inside the closets, checked under the bed, looked at every window. Everything was locked. Everything was empty. Nothing was out of place. She couldn't sleep. She lay in bed with the lamp on, scrolling her phone, telling herself she'd imagined it, that it was a visual trick. That exhaustion does things to perception. The next morning, she was at the bathroom mirror again, brushing her teeth, and she noticed that the mirror was slightly off angle. Just slightly. Maybe 2 degrees, enough to change the reflection from what she was used to seeing. She checked the back of the mirror. It was anchored to a sliding track, a standard bathroom medicine cabinet setup. It could be opened. It could be pushed aside. She had never opened that cabinet. She reached up and slid the mirror panel to the left. Behind it was a deep medicine cabinet she didn't know existed. The previous tenant's name was still on a prescription bottle on the middle shelf. There was a narrow gap at the back of the cabinet, clearly a construction imperfection that looked into darkness. She shined a flashlight into it. It opened into the dead space between the wall studs, approximately 18 inches deep. It was empty, but it was also exactly the kind of space that would explain sounds in the walls. It was exactly the kind of space someone could reach through if the mirror were left unlocked from the inside. She had to super seal it the same morning. She does not have an explanation for what she saw in the mirror that night. She never found one. She moved out at the end of her lease. The sound of children. This one comes from Frank, who was 44 and had lived in his home in rural upstate New York for over a decade. He knew that property like he knew his own face, every sound, every draft, every board that needed replacing. His wife and kids were visiting family in Albany. Frank had stayed behind to repaint the back deck, a project he'd been putting off for a season. He'd worked through the afternoon, cleaned up by 6, and was in the living room eating takeout by 7. At 9:45, he heard children laughing. He put his food down. His kids were in Albany. He had no immediate neighbors. The road was a state route with no houses within shouting distance. He sat and listened. High-pitched, unmistakably young. 2 voices, possibly 3, coming from somewhere behind the house, from the direction of the tree line that bordered his property. He went out with a flashlight. He covered the yard, the deck area, the woodpile, the small shed at the back of the property. He walked to the tree line and shined the light into the trees. The laughter had stopped. The woods were silent. He went back inside. At 11:20, it started again. This time, he didn't go outside. He called the local non-emergency line and reported it. Kids in the woods, possible trespassing, possible safety issue given the time and the darkness. A deputy came out and searched the property and the first 50 yards of the tree line. Nothing was found. Frank is not a man who frightens easily. He painted the deck, fixed the gutters, dealt with a family of skunks under the crawlspace with equanimity. He is practical and unimpressed by ghost stories. "I've never been able to explain it," he says. "I know what I heard. I've heard coyotes. I've heard foxes do that thing where they sound almost human. This wasn't that. This was children, laughing, in my backyard, at midnight, in February. He's never heard it again. He's not sure whether that's comforting or not. Last light. This is the last story. It comes from a woman named Grace who was 62 years old when it happened, and who has been telling it to her family at every holiday gathering since, not because she wants them to be afraid, but because she wants them to be careful. Grace was home alone, as she often was, her children grown and scattered, her husband on a work trip, in the house where she had lived for 28 years. She knew it as well as she knew her own hands. She knew exactly where the light switches were in the dark, which drawer stuck in the winter, how long the water took to run warm. It was October, 8 in the evening. She was reading in the armchair by the front window when she happened to glance up and see a man walking slowly along the sidewalk in front of her house. People walked by her house. She paid no attention. But this man stopped. He stood on the sidewalk and looked directly at her through the window. She could see him clearly in the light from her lamp. Middle-aged, ordinary-looking. He just stood there, looking in, for a count of 10 seconds. Then he turned and walked to her front door and rang the bell. Grace set her book down and went to the door. She did not open it. "Can I help you?" she said through the door. The man said something she couldn't hear clearly. She asked him to repeat himself. He said, "I just wanted to make sure you were going to be okay tonight." She didn't respond. She went to the kitchen, called her son, and stayed on the phone with him for the 45 minutes it took for him and his wife to drive over. She didn't look out the window again. When her son arrived, there was no one on the sidewalk. He checked the perimeter of the house, nothing out of place. Her son wanted to call the police. Grace said there was nothing to report. Technically, a man had rung a doorbell and said something odd. That wasn't a crime, but she never forgot what he said. "I just wanted to make sure you were going to be okay tonight." As if he knew something she didn't. As if the evaluation had already been made. As if she had been watched for long enough that someone had formed a conclusion. She still lives in that house. She still reads in the armchair by the window. But she keeps the blind down now. She keeps it down every night. The thing about being home alone. The phrase home alone used to mean freedom. The TV is yours. The snacks are yours. The volume, the temperature, the schedule, all yours. There is a version of home alone that is pure, uncomplicated peace. But there is another version. The one that visits you at 2 a.m. when you hear a sound you can't place. The one that shows up when the dog won't stop barking and you don't know why. The one that whispers through the silence of a house that you thought you knew completely, and reminds you that you can never quite know everything. Every person in this collection would tell you the same thing if you asked them. They didn't think it would happen to them. Their neighborhood was safe. Their house was locked. They'd been alone there dozens of times before without incident. They weren't reckless. They weren't careless. They were just people, living their ordinary lives on ordinary nights until the night that wasn't ordinary at all. The security system had always been theoretical, just a precaution, something you have but never really expect to need, until you need it. Until the glass breaks, or the breathing starts, or the lock turns from the outside, or you look under the bed. Being alone doesn't make you a target, but it does mean that in the moment when something goes wrong, there's no one standing between you and it. No one to call out to from the next room. No one who will notice right away if you stop answering your phone. That's not a reason to be afraid of solitude. It's a reason to take it seriously. Lock the doors. Know your exits. Trust your instincts, even when your rational mind is scrambling to talk you out of them. And if something feels wrong, truly, viscerally wrong, in the way that only the oldest part of your brain can feel, don't wait to find out why. Leave first. Ask questions later. Every single person in these stories who got out safely made one decision in common. They listened to the voice that said something is wrong here, before the voice that said, "But you're probably overreacting." Listen to the first voice. It knows things you haven't figured out yet. Stay safe out there. And if you're home alone tonight, lock the door. Double check it. You'll sleep better.